Welcome to World of Short Selling, a podcast focused exclusively on what is happening in the short selling space. Who is short, what and why? Tune in and find out. Today, I would like to warmly welcome everyone to an interview with Edwin Dorsey, who runs Batman Research. In this interview, you will learn why Care.com sent private investigators to Edwin's home, how Stanford tried to make him take down the report targeting the company, how is he using consumer complaints within his research, and what other stocks he's interested in. Before we start, I would just like to remind you that all you hear on the podcast are opinions. I'm not a registered investment advisor. Please do your own due diligence. Short selling can hold risks that are different to going long. You should assume that we're short the names we discuss. So I would like to welcome you, Edwin, here on the podcast, and I would like to thank you for accepting the invite.
Hi, Jan. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm excited as well. I just learned that I am the first one to interview you, so it's going to be a big deal for both of us, I believe. So the first question for you is extremely easy, or in your case, it is extremely easy. What made you sign up to Care.com as a babysitter impersonating Harvey Weinstein?
Okay, so just a little background. Care.com is the largest babysitting platform in the US, and they were publicly traded until a few months ago when they got acquired by IAC. And I think it was my summer after freshman year. I went home, you know how like college kids go home and they start talking to their high school friends. And one of them had been a babysitter on Care.com, and she was getting scammed by like people on the platform. And I'm like, this is a little interesting. So I started poking around. I checked Pacer and I saw there were a lot of lawsuits against the company for safety issues. I Googled the company and I saw there was like a lot of safety related incidents. So I decided to test out the company's safety for myself. And I tried to apply to be a Care.com babysitter as Harvey Weinstein. And they had you like make up an address, make up a social security number, and I just like made up all this info. I used the photo of like Harvey Weinstein. This was clearly a bogus account. And then at the end of like the application process to be a Care.com babysitter, they like tell you like, thanks, we're gonna review your info and get back to you on whether or not you're accepted within like 3 days. And I'm like, there's no way they accept me. But then 3 days later, they emailed me, congratulations, you've been accepted to be a Care.com babysitter. So I went on the platform and started applying to babysitting jobs as Harvey Weinstein. And they even like upgraded me and like said I was like a pro babysitter as Harvey Weinstein. And then I took screenshots of it all.
Sure. That's insane.
So that's I guess what got me started on Care.com, and then I ended up writing 2 articles about the safety issues, and that caused some waves as well.
Sure. And was it the first time that you looked at a stock from a investigative angle, or what brought you, let's say more generally maybe to short selling, because obviously you shorted Care.com as well. So what was it your first in-depth research or?
No, I would say I've always been interested in stocks from a really, really young age, like second grade. And towards the end of high school, beginning of college, I started getting a little into short selling. The first stock I was heavily involved in was Mallinckrodt. And they make a drug called Acthar, and the price of Acthar has gone from $30 to like 30,000 over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And the company did a lot of shady things to promote Acthar, like paying doctors who would prescribe it, and reimbursing people's copays for it.
Yeah, and it's still going down, by the way. So
I think the big red flag for Mallinckrodt was there's government sources that let you see like which doctors are they paying the most. And I looked for Mallinckrodt at the 10 doctors receiving like the most money from Mallinckrodt and speaker fees and consulting fees. And like of the 10, I think 7 had been arrested or disciplined in some way. And you're like, that's a little bit of a red flag there.
Got it. So, coming back to perhaps, sourcing of your ideas, you had a friend that was threatened on a babysitting platform with Mallinckrodt. Maybe it was similar, or the doctors or whatever. But how do you come about sourcing ideas
So I've got nothing special for you on that. I just talk to a lot of people, and
Mhm.
anytime I'm in a conversation with someone, I'll almost always ask them towards the end, like, "Hey, do you know of any scammy companies I should look into? Are there any companies you think are shortable?" And I'm half joking, but sometimes someone will say something interesting. I also talk to a lot of other hedge fund managers. I think
Sure.
Twitter is an outstanding source to come up with
Mhm.
short ideas. I think there's a lot of great content on Twitter, and it's free and it's easily digestible. So I think Twitter is a really underused source. Um,
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll just watch interviews with CEOs, and you know, so sometimes just it won't click, or the CEO will just seem off or ingenuine, or just stuff they're saying won't make sense, and that'll inspire me to look into a company like Mallinckrodt. I got interested in that when Mark Trudeau, the old CEO, or the current CEO, did an interview with Jim Cramer, and just a lot of the stuff wasn't making sense. So that's how I
Sure.
got interested there, but no special way to source, I guess, other than Twitter.
Sure, sure. And actually, when you stumble upon care.com, was it through your question? Do you know about any scammy companies, or did the friend actually complain to you without any sort of motivation on your end?
I will explain the entire situation for you, Jan. We were dropping this friend who's a girl off at her house, um, my friend and I, and she was like, I'm freaked out, like, because like someone's been sending me death threats, and we're like, what? What's happening? And then she explained that she's like was on Care.com as a babysitter, and what happens is there's these scammers who like go on the website, like look for young babysitters and say, "Hey, I'm moving to your area. I need a babysitter. Like, can you watch my kid?" And you'll say, "Yeah, whatever." And they'll be like, "Okay, I'm going to send you your first month's check like in the mail," which is kind of
Sure.
weird, but they'll send you a $2,000 check or something, and the check will be fake. And what they do is then they say, "Oh, we're actually not moving to the area." So they hope you cash the fake check. It'll take the bank about a week to notice it's fake. And then they hope you send them real money back before you realize the money they sent you is fake. And if you don't do that, they'll get super aggressive, and some like they'll send death threats, because they have your address, they know you're young. So that's kind of
Sure.
how one of the Care.com scams works. And I was
Oh
just
my
like,
god.
that's crazy. And the company
Yeah.
wasn't being
I
helpful.
get that very much. That's really insane. Certainly makes sense to impersonate Harvey Weinstein in that case. Do you have any specific focus regarding your research? Do you like something more than some other industries, or do you have any sort of focus?
So, Jan, I would say I'm focused on stuff I can understand. So, like advanced biotech stuff is usually out, complex
Hmm.
financial things are usually out. Simpler businesses tend to be like more digestible for me. So, like Care.com, Yext, I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything that's like super complicated about them.
Mm.
I'm young, so I don't want to box myself in too much, but I think I'm gravitating a lot towards tech companies and tech shorts. But I don't know if there's necessarily a specific style or
Sure.
box.
It's rather well. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, do what you understand. That's the most important thing. And anyways, I mean, in your research in Care.com, for example, I remember that you looked at the numbers, right, of the users on the platform, or the babysitters. I think, right, and the company was touting, I don't know, like millions, or I don't know what the number was, whatever they were saying, and you just did a very simple thing where you looked at the babysitters through search, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, the company was saying, Care.com was saying that they had more babysitters in the US than there were people employed by Walmart. And I'm like, this just doesn't add up. So I looked at every city on like the Care.com search feature, and they let you search for the number of babysitters in a specific city. And I like did that for the top 100 cities, and I added it up, and it was like 200,000, when if it was like proportional to what they were saying, it should have been like 2 million. So it was off by a lot, and that was just like a pretty red flag. Like their numbers don't make sense. And if
Yeah.
you looked at like their metrics in every investor presentation, it was just like up and to the right, KGAR at 40%. And I'm like, okay, something doesn't smell right here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's like simple step is just showcasing how bad it actually was. Now the stock went down and was down at more than 60% at one point in early 2019. But you did write about it a bit earlier, so you had to wait for, let's say, vindication in terms of the share price movement. And you were short yourself. Like, how did you deal with the timing? Like, did you just short and wait, or did you had some sort of process regarding that, or?
So I'll let you in on a little secret, Jan. In the US, I'm almost certain of this. You cannot short stocks if you're under the age of 21, because you can't get a margin account.
Ah, okay, fair point. Okay, yeah, sure.
So you need to do it through puts. The first article, I actually didn't take a position. Um,
You mean the way back in 2017? You mean? Or?
yeah, exactly. I wrote
Okay,
another
fair enough. Yeah.
article in 2018 and I took a position, but I ended up actually losing money because the stock didn't fall as much as I was expecting. So people don't know this, but I actually lost money on the entire care.com thing. So I think it was really just like a passion project. I don't think people fully understand all the stuff I did behind the scenes to try to take them down, but I just thought they were a really bad company. I invested a lot of time in trying to expose them.
Sure. And do you have any sort of takeaways regarding actually buying puts, or is there something that you would do different? I mean, you would do differently, or how would you think about it now, or maybe how you are employing the strategy now?
I mean, um, it would make me want to just like go plain shorting in the future. I think now I understand the big timing component with options. I don't know. I honestly don't do too much just individual trading on my own. I'm usually just researching stuff for other people. So I don't deal with the timing component as much.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of interesting to get a bit of insight on how you dealt with that. Were you actually in contact with someone from the company? Like, did you actually talk to the management, or?
No, but they tried to get in contact with me by calling Stanford to complain about me.
We'll get to that. We'll certainly get to that.
Investigator to my house. They were not so nice to me. But no, I never reached out to the company. Now, or at least not that I can remember. I'm trying to think if I shot an email, but no, I never reached out.
But and they went to your house, or what was that? I didn't quite catch that, or.
There was this big Wall Street Journal article that came out on
Yes.
care.com, and I get a small mention in it, but I was like the original tipster for it, and I was talking to them like all the time before that came out. And then the day after this big Wall Street Journal article came out, I think the article came out on a Friday, and then like on Monday, like the first business day after, like a private investigator shows up at my like parents' house in upstate New York, and my dad is like calls me and he's like, someone with like a body cam like just came to our front door and was like asking questions about you, and it was so obvious it was the company, right? Because this is like right after the Wall Street Journal story, and I'm like, oh, okay. And he was a little like spooked, but
That's one senator away from being Marco Hodas already. That's Jesus Christ. Okay, that's interesting. That's certainly interesting. And what would you say were the key takeaways from your research, into care.com, for your research going forward? What you kind of learned from the story, be it about individual stocks or just more, generally anything about investing or research or people.
Well, I would say maybe two things. One, stock prices never react as fast as you think they will. Like I thought, oh, as soon as I like tell the world how like bad this company is, it'll fall apart and like, I'll be a hero. And that just didn't happen. Stuff takes a lot longer to spread. And two, I would say like the value of persistence. Like I think by the end of it, I probably had cold emailed 150 journalists or something, and that ended with like one big piece 9 months later. But I did not think that it would take 3 years for this company to like kind of be exposed.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, and certainly, I mean, makes you think that's for sure, because I mean, I remember that you, as a Harvey Weinstein, you were not even you were upgraded. Okay, that's one thing, but you got a like a CPR certification or something, right, or first aid as well,
Yeah, it was
which
just
is
like the
just like
company
insane.
clearly wasn't doing the right safety checks. Like they had little boxes to say like if you're CPR certified, and I don't know, I'm sure there's like a certificate or something you can do to like validate that, but instead I like just checked a box and they added it to my profile saying as Harvey Weinstein I was like CPR certified.
And so, how do you feel about the reaction of Stanford, which is, the topic of a recent article by a Stanford student newspaper, if I'm correct? Yeah.
So I got a lot to say on this, Jan. So this company, the co-founder of the company, David Krupinski, somehow, I don't know exactly how this happened, had a phone call set up with Stanford's like head of computer security office. And in it, he was like saying all this bad stuff about me and my article, and like saying that I broke Care.com's terms of service, which is true. Like I broke their terms of service by posing as Harvey Weinstein. But anyways, then like 2 days after I published my article on Care.com, I tweeted it out. It went a little viral. Like the stock fell 6% the day of. One of their board members, Tony Florence, resigned the day after my article. And anyways, then Stanford's dean of students, Christine Griffith, sends an email to me asking to meet, saying like they got a complaint about my like Wi-Fi usage, which is just so absurd. And I go to meet with them, and it's like this hour-long meeting with me, the dean of students, and head of computer security at Stanford. And basically, like they're trying to make this into a huge deal, like that I violated a company's terms of service while on Stanford Wi-Fi, being like, you can be investigated for this. This is a serious violation. We got serious concerns, whatever. And I'm like a sophomore, so I'm a little intimidated by this. And they're just going on and on and on and on and on. And it was literally like an hour in this like cold windowless room of them just like telling me about how bad I was for writing out this company. And they like one of them was like, well, would you be willing to remove the article? And I'm like, I'll think about it. And then I get out of there and I'm like, I am not going to like take down this article, because it was clear like someone within the university like really cared about getting this article taken down for whatever like silly reason. I think like 3 of the Care.com board members are Stanford alums, and they're probably wealthy, so presumably they're donors. So maybe they called in a favor, but like someone was involved behind the scenes to like get Stanford to care about this. And Stanford was like, "You broke our Wi-Fi policy, so like you're in big trouble." And then they like said, "Oh, we can do like an Office of Community Standards investigation," which is like a serious investigation into me for writing an article about this company. And at that point, I just like, just ignored them.
And like, first you were maybe slightly intimidated, just because of course of the setting and so on and so forth, and then the gravity of this issue, of the people involved, let's say. How did you feel throughout? Like, did you kind of just gradually said, I don't care, or did you, like, what was the process there?
So I think I told my parents about it, and obviously like they are freaking out, because up to this point in my life I had like never gotten in trouble for anything before. Like maybe I got one speeding ticket or something. So they weren't like, they thought I must have done something wrong, right? So they have me talk to a family friend who's a lawyer, who's like, yeah, you did nothing wrong and this is silly. Um, so you have nothing to worry about. And I think that calmed everyone's nerves. But my parents
Okay.
were a little spooked. They're like, don't piss off Stanford. You don't want to get in trouble. So honestly, for a few months, I just like stopped researching Care.com, and I just like, didn't focus on stocks as much. And then I saw that they'd like settled with the Massachusetts Attorney General for like $500,000 for fake background checks on babysitters. And I'm like, I just saw a news report on that. And then I decided to send a public records request to like the Massachusetts Attorney General for consumer complaints against Care.com. And I was expecting one or two or like five. And then I get this like massive PDF with hundreds of complaints against care.com. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, how are there so many complaints against this company? And like, I was reading them and they were like, these are like well documented complaints. Like, the people are making sense. So then I got interested again. This is my sophomore year. And I knew like if I wrote on them again that Stanford like might go after me and like get upset about me breaking the Wi-Fi policy, because they'd also told me that I shouldn't use Stanford Wi-Fi to research care.com, which just seems absurd.
Just a bit, just a bit.
I wanted to like write about this company and also like show my disapproval with Stanford's pressure. So I wrote this massive article on care.com, like really critical, and I'm still really proud of it. And I waited until the very last day of sophomore year. Like I had like June 10th or something. I had my stats final later that day, and then I was flying home. And that morning, I published this really big article. That way, even if Stanford got a phone call from like whatever corrupt administrator, they really couldn't do anything to me because by the time like they figured it out, I'd be like on a plane home. So that was my way of voicing my disapproval. And I'm sure like the university really has a big file on me now, but I don't care.
So, in the first instance, were you really surprised, or did you ever thought about it in the back of your mind that, such a piece could actually lead to something like that?
I was surprised that like Stanford got involved. I was happy one of the board members resigned the day after because like one of the board
Sure.
members from a VC firm, like they put out an 8K saying he'd resigned effective immediately. So I assume my piece had some impact. I think it goes to show like companies that like care about short sellers are almost always like the companies you want to look at. And like good companies,
Sure.
legitimate companies, they don't care about short sellers. They're just going to operate and let their like results prove themselves. Like I think the best response ever, and I don't know if it's gotten enough credit, the best response ever to a short seller was Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix. He wrote a Seeking Alpha piece. I think this was in 2010 or something, to
Yeah.
respond to Whitney Tilson's criticism of Netflix. And, he was just like so polite and so fact based. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was so clear. Um, and I think it's still on the internet now. Reed Hastings like response to Whitney Tilson on like all these short sellers short Netflix's stock. And like to me, if you want to respond to a short seller, like that's the way to do it. Just like write a short factual statement, kind of explaining your different views. But any company that's attacking short seller, like calling a college to complain about a college student writing about your company, it's like that's just so weird.
Yeah, I guess, but then again, Netflix is not allowing people to impersonate Harvey Weinstein and threaten some kids. So, because I mean, as funny as all this is, I mean, all the complaints that you talked about, they're very serious, and a lot of the lapses in security at Care.com was really lethal in some points. So that's really just horrible.
Yeah, like
Um,
something around 6 or 7 kids have been killed by Care.com babysitters who had previous criminal histories. Like, how do you let someone who's been like arrested 4 times get on your platform just like with no disclosures and let them start babysitting kids? It's ludicrous. And like the really bad thing is like parents don't view it as like a Craigslist where like anyone's on there and they need to do their own vetting. They just assume that the company has done some of their own vetting because the company says they do some of their own vetting. So it's not like they're just letting bad people on there. They're letting bad people on there and they're loaning them credibility through the platform.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's really, it was really, really insane. Did Stanford actually react after the bigger report or not? Like, was 2017 the only time that you interacted with them in that manner regarding Care.com?
No. So they didn't react after I put out the second bigger report on care.com. And at that point it was like basically summertime. I've noticed like how LinkedIn it'll tell you who views your profile. A large number of lawyers in our general counsel's office, Stanford general counsel's office, have viewed my LinkedIn profile. Because like in the meeting for like like the dean of students would like mention 5 or 6 times to me like, oh, you should really reach out to Stanford's general counsel. Like you should, I'll give you the contact info for this woman. You should email her. You should call her. She'd love to meet with you. And I'm like, what the hell? Like obviously I'm not gonna reach out to Stanford's general counsel to meet with like your lawyers. Like what? This is so stupid. But I'm like, because I think like I have no idea what their game plan was. I just know like, so for some reason, someone high up at the university, a board member, a really senior administrator, like got a phone call from a donor who cared about this issue and was like, get this article down. And then Stanford like went completely berserk and like tried to get me to take it down through all like just this ridiculousness of a why like their email to me says Wi-Fi policy. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not like what? And then I'm close to graduating, and I'm going to graduate a quarter early, so in like 2 weeks. And I told our student newspaper, we have like a like student email newspaper like that half the student bodies subscribe to, called the Fountain Hopper. And I like showed this all to them, and they're like, wow, this is crazy. And they wrote like their front page story about how the university tried to like intimidate me yesterday. So that's been making some waves, and I know like they're probably pissed about it, and I'm happy that they're upset.
So I guess they never really acknowledged your research afterwards. Like, did they ever like tell you about the content of the research? You know, I obviously they were talking about Wi-Fi policies and whatnot, but did they actually talk about you impersonating Harvey Weinstein? Or
Yeah, oh yeah, they talked about the fact that I impersonated Harvey Weinstein a lot. Like that, their whole thing, Stanford's whole thing was you're not allowed to
policy,
break
right?
another company's terms of service while
Yeah.
you're using Stanford Wi-Fi. And because I signed up as Harvey Weinstein using Stanford Wi-Fi, I like broke another company's terms of service while on Stanford Wi-Fi. By the way, completely for journalistic purposes. And and their idea was, well, because you broke terms of service while on Stanford Wi-Fi, the only right thing to do would be to take the entire report down and not report on this company anymore. So
Yeah.
I guess that's where their priorities lie. And it's like I'm sure they violated or came close to violating like a ton of laws in the process. Like in California, there's stuff called Leonard laws, which like protect students' right to free speech. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of privacy laws that like you can't talk about a student with an outside person. Like how the hell is like a Stanford administrator having a phone call with the co-founder of this company about me? Like how does that even get arranged? I'm sure there's like a lot of things where they like came close to some ethical line, and it's just like so crazy to me that they would like it, and it's like it's not like you know, this is in the university's best interest. Like, this does nothing for the university. This is a company that's like literally abusing and killing children. I'm trying to blow the whistle on it, and you're trying to stop me to further the interest of like financial interest of some donor. It's so silly.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the points that I kind of stopped at when I was thinking about this, you know, because obviously anyone that reads your report understands what you're doing, right? I mean, it's very silly to essentially read the report and say, hey, you violated their terms of service because you impersonated Harvey Weinstein as a babysitter. I mean, that's just a lawyer maybe thinks like that. Let's say a very like a strict lawyer that doesn't have connection to reality, but then anyone else, of course, understands the logic behind it, right? So that's kind of like that was, of course, the main thing that I thought about. Why do you think there was such a lapse in logic? You know, where there was like it's obvious what you're doing, and they just couldn't understand the content. They just had I mean, you alluded to it maybe before, but you just think that like they only cared about getting it down, or
I would just say that like it's obviously there was some ulterior motive behind it, because this company has a lot of ties to Stanford. Like 3 of their board members are Stanford alums. One of the biggest investors is a Stanford alum. I mean, these people are probably wealthy, so they're probably donors. They're probably well connected because they're former Stanford students. So they might know someone on the board. And like the way I think like this played out is probably one of the board members connected to the care.com probably reached out to someone high up at Stanford, either a board member, the provost,
Mm.
or the president, and was like, hey, we've got this like terrible, terrible Stanford student who's writing all this false stuff about us. And then Stanford's like, oh, okay, like Mr. Whoever, we'll take care of it because you're important. Um, and then they tried to get me to take my article down. And then like I bet the dean of students was like, oh, this student did nothing wrong, so let's find the smallest thing we can like pick on him for. And the thing we're gonna pick on him for is like the Wi-Fi policy violations. And I'm like,
Sure.
okay, this is so silly. And it honestly like irritates me a lot to this day because like I have I have no faith in Stanford's internal investigations whatsoever. And like I like since then I've like gone out of my way to like fight anything with the university I can because I think they're like just completely corrupt on some of this stuff. But yeah, it's like I don't know what completely motivated them. I'd love for some journalists. I think this is a great topic if you're a journalist listening to look into because I think there's more here. And I'd love to know exactly what happened and how it played out.
Sure. I mean, it is really fascinating, and especially their reaction. I mean, you can clearly see that there's something going on here because it's just insane. I mean, just insane, you know? I mean, if you say that care.com is a fraud and write, a report, yeah, I don't know, based on some sort of like, research or whatever, perhaps, I could understand that they might want to kind of try to learn more about you or whatever. But when it's like, you're impersonating Harvey Weinstein, that's it. Like, that's just insane, yeah.
Yeah,
That's just really
it's
insane.
very true. It's very true.
But I have to say that when I read the report from the student newspaper, I wasn't really surprised. I was kind of like, okay, that's just another reaction to short sellers. That's knee jerk or whatever. Yeah, the CTO is calling the university. That's not really like for me. It was just okay. That's another story into the pile of like short sellers being abused by people who pick on them for no reason. Yeah. So unfortunately, that was my reaction. I was like, well, okay, that's unfortunate. So many of these stories.
Yeah, it's really yeah. I think on campus it's getting a little bit of a movement because like people are like, wow, this could happen to me. This is really just completely corrupt. Um,
That's cool. I mean, that's another point. Okay, Stanford doesn't love you. Care.com doesn't love you, although now it's a private company, so or part of a company, right? I'm not sure if they're like, was the acquirer public or not?
yeah, so it was IAC, so big tech company, and they bought Care.com, and I think their plan was to have like Care.com be a standalone brand at least for now, but eventually like add services.
Fair enough, fair enough. But anyways, you have like these big entities, being negative on you, but then also brings a lot of spotlight on you, which can yield some interesting, connections or some interesting things. So, I mean, was there a lot of good things coming from this as well? Not only stress and let's say your parents being a bit freaked out by a person with a camera in front of their house.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say I'm really proud of the Wall Street Journal article. Like that, just internally, I'm really satisfied because I feel like I like took down a company. I was literally like hurting children. So just I'm satisfied with the end result of what happened. I would say I've met a ton of people through this. So now I like talk to a lot of journalists regularly. Like people who I was talking to about care.com before, now I talk to like more now. I would say like a lot of hedge fund managers like might know of me. So like, oh, you're like you took down that care.com or like you were. So I think that gave me some like credibility, got me a lot of Twitter followers. Like whenever someone wants to see my work or like I'm talking to someone over email who I like don't know, usually I'll link to the care.com piece to be like, hey, this is the type of work I can do. Um, a lot of people, even though it's a 2-year-old piece, like a lot of people still read it and like reach out to me sometimes. So I would say just one of the big benefits of it, I guess, is I've met a lot of the short sellers, and it's given me some credibility in the short community because it's like a piece I put out and I was right for the right reasons.
Yeah. Mark Cahotas tweeted about you today, so I mean that's he shared a tweet of I think of the newspaper or something like that. So that's
Yeah,
a big,
yeah.
big,
And Mark
big support.
Cahotas was my like the first, honestly, I met him beginning of freshman year. So I wanted to meet with him, but I didn't have a car. Because Stanford doesn't let freshmen have cars. So I took like $100 Uber up to meet with him. But I'm just like, everyone's saying all this crazy nice things about him. Like it's gotta be worth it. So I went up to meet with him and we talked for like 3 or 4 hours and he really, really got me interested on the short side. And he literally up to that point I didn't have a Twitter account. He forced me to make a Twitter account while I was with him, and I made a Twitter account, and then he tweeted about me to get me my first 300 followers, which was super nice. So honestly, if I hadn't met Mark Cahotas beginning of freshman year, I don't know if any of this would have happened. I don't know if I would have gone down this path, Jan.
How did you meet actually? Did you reach out to him, or what was the connection there?
So everything in my life just comes through a string of connections. My high school principal introduced me to a hedge fund manager in Rochester. This
Mm-hmm.
hedge fund manager in Rochester, where I grew up, his son's roommate was a young guy, an investment analyst named Chris Dross. And then I talked to Chris Dross, and then Chris Dross introduced me to Mark Cahotas when he found out I was in California. So that was kind of how the connections worked. High school principal to hedge fund manager to son's roommate who short selling to Mark Cahotas.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, that just goes to show, how random things can lead to great things. That's great. And actually, do you have any other role models when it comes to research, or who inspired you apart from Bruce Wayne, I guess?
um, there's some hedge funds I've worked with in the past that really like anonymity, so I won't mention them, even though they've been big inspirations for me. But I really like, in terms of activists, I love Aurelius Value. I think they're outstanding. And it's just the way it's written. It's fact based. It's not too hyperbolic. You can understand it. It's clear. Um, you know, I think they do an outstanding job. There's no activist reports I look forward to reading more than Aurelius. And generally speaking, they're doing something with some positive impact on the world. Whatever, you can say Hershey's is inflating earnings and it should go down 30%, but I would much rather say, oh, this company makes a medical device that's hurting people, or they're scamming people by overpaying doctors, or this company's product isn't safe. That to me is much cooler than whatever Hershey's is prices of input chocolate, it's going to go up. But I really like Aurelius. I think Gotham City Research is good. But I haven't followed them recently. I think Citron's really good. Even though I think.
What do you think about Lock-in?
No opinion. No opinion. And honestly, I have no opinion on a lot of stuff. No opinion on Luckin, no opinion on Tesla, really. I just have no opinion on a lot of stuff. Especially I like more off the beaten path shorts, shorts that don't have a lot of short interest that people don't really know about. I think you can just get a lot more accomplished if you focus on less controversial stuff.
Yeah, and I mean it can take a lot of time to actually dissect some of the stuff that people already follow, and I guess there's not much edge left. I mean, there's not much one can add regarding Tesla research and so on and so forth. So that makes a lot of sense. And Aurelius Value, I mean that's great. Yeah, I mean, and I guess you guys share a bit more of the activist approach I know that Orlis always uses a lot of like bankruptcy filings or a lot of lawsuits and so on and so forth in the research which you obviously did as well. So that's something that I just popped into my mind when you mentioned it. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's kind of two big styles are document based versus like actually maybe not just two styles. Like it seems like people there's different flavors of like short selling. Some people are really documents based, so that could be like Aurelius. Other people are really like investigative journalist based, like that's probably Roddy Boyd. I'm sure he's like interviewing people and talking to people, and that's how he gets his info. Other people might be more models based, where they're really crunching the numbers and building out models and Excel sheets, and my guess is maybe that's a little more like Kerrisdale. I'm definitely in the documents based camp. Like I love searching for documents. Like I don't really talk, like maybe I talk to other funds just to like get their opinions on stuff. But like for me, finding something cool is like finding something cool through a FOIA request or public records request, or something like that.
I would like to actually stay here for just a minute, because you use, in your care.com story and your subsequent ones, Freedom of Information Act requests and so on and so forth, and documents that are not usually easily accessible, let's say, because Pacer is one thing, but everybody has that, or at least most of the people have and have used it. But could you tell a bit more about the process about Freedom of Information Act? Is it really complex, or how did you actually found it?
So I like to just like I first heard of it because I followed John Gavin, who runs a company called Probes Reporter on Twitter, and his whole thing was he sends a lot of FOIA requests to the SEC, and I'm like, that's the first time I think I heard the word FOIA, just seeing him tweet about it, and then I Googled it, and then when I was like obsessing over Care.com, I'm like, they're based in Massachusetts. I don't know what really this like popped in my mind that I could like maybe send a public records request for info. But I wrote like I'm like, who would have complaints against Care.com? I'm like, the state attorney general. So I just wrote an email to the state attorney general being with the headline public records request being like, I don't know if I can do this, but if I can you like give me the complaints on Care.com? And then like 2 months later they called me and were like, yeah, we'll send you the complaints. And then so now like I think state attorney generals are a great source of this Care.com stuff. And the Massachusetts attorney general was really nice to start. Like they were giving me these complaints on Care.com, and then I don't know what happened, but they like lost their mind and weren't going to give me like future records on the company. Like there was a letter that the Massachusetts attorney general sent Care.com, I think at some point in 2017, like criticizing their safety practices. And I sent in like a public records request for this letter. This is a pretty standard thing. And they're like, you can't, it's confidential. And I'm like, it's clearly not confidential because the company has like disclosed it in their filings. Like, you should give it to me. And they're like, no. And then I appeal it to like whoever like the appeals go to. And they're like, we're ordering them to like reevaluate their decision. And they're like, and then like they keep delaying, and this is like taking 4 or 5 months just to get this one letter from the Massachusetts State Attorney General for this letter on Care.com. They sent to Care.com. And then like after like months of arguing and hand-wringing and negotiation, they're like, okay, we'll give you the letter, but every word except for like the last half of the last sentence where we talk about the settlement amount is going to be blacked out. So then I get this letter where every like line is like, it's literally just like every line is blacked out, and let's like save the last 4 like words of this document, and it's a joke. And then I like kept appealing, and it just never happened. So but I showed it to a reporter, and they're like, wow, I haven't seen a company act like this before, or AG act like this before. But I guess the moral of the story there is, if they don't want to give it to you, they're not going to give it to you. So you got to take your losses and run.
That's another insane experience with the entity, with the government or authorities. I mean, you're full of that, and that's really cool. So actually the process is, okay, you just reach out, And basically, if they don't want to send something, you have to appeal it, and that's maybe where it could get really complex, because you could appeal it and say, my lawyers say that under Freedom of Information Act, I should get it, and then they will kind of go back and forwards, I guess.
I think generally speaking, usually they'll just not want to give it if it's something related to their department or could make them look bad. But here, out of like the 50 states in the U.S., let's say you send a public records request for consumer complaints against a company to all 50 of them. Like my guess, I don't know the exact number, is 30 of them will just right off the bat deny you and say,
Okay.
these are just, generally speaking, all consumer complaints are considered private investigatory records, so we're not going to give them to you. And I've never challenged that before. My guess is like they're allowed to do that. So a lot of state AGs will just off the bat say, no, you can't get our consumer complaints. About 10 will give them to you. Some might charge you a little bit of money. Others might do it for free. Some might send them by mail. Some will send them over email. Some will have you go to a portal. Like, there's no consistent way of doing it. Um, and then maybe another 10 will either say there's no complaints, and I'm convinced some state AGs just say there's no complaints when there actually are, just because they're either like not doing the work or they just don't want to give them. Um, or sometimes there'll actually be no complaints to give, because for a state like Wyoming might not have a complaint against Tesla. And also a lot of like companies, most of the complaints will be in the company's home state, because even if you're like in Wyoming and you get scammed by care.com, you might not write the Wyoming state attorney general. You might write the Massachusetts state attorney general, because that's where care.com is located. So if you ever want to like send a public records request on this stuff, you want to send it to like the state where the company's located.
Sure, sure, sure. And that's almost like it would be an interesting screener, if you just kept on asking for a lot of the complaints. I mean, maybe to the states that they would give it to you, and then you would basically track who's complaining about what. But I guess that's a bit complex.
Yeah, Jan, when I'm interested in a company, one of the first things I do is send public record requests to their home
That's really
state
cool.
for complaints. And honestly, it's really informative. Because sometimes the complaints will be completely frivolous, and you'll get company responses, and you'll see like, no, the company had a really good response.
Hmm.
It seems like
Hmm.
there's just the number of complaints isn't that big. So this company probably has some good business practices. And then other times you'll just get these like really well documented complaints, well written, and you can tell the company's probably in the wrong. And what the companies usually do if they're like in the wrong is like they'll just refund a large amount of money. So I think I remember I was like looking into this car dealership, and this woman is like, they sold me a car with a blue book value of $2,000 for $10,000. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is like really crazy. This is bad. Like, I wonder what the company side of the story is. And the company side of the story was like, we are improving our processes and we've refunded $8,000 difference. And I'm like, okay, so you're like actually scamming people. It's good to know. But you can get a
That's
lot
true.
from this process. Like, I'm surprised more people don't do it.
Sure. I was about to say, was it Carvana? But then Carvana loses money in their cars, so it wasn't that one.
It's not Carvana.
So I'm just thinking, like, regarding consumer complaints. Have you looked at Smile Direct Club, like the Hindenburg short? Like, did you?
I read the Hindenburg short. I thought it was great. I have not sent public records requests on Smile Direct Club. I might. So Smile Direct Club, though, like from my perspective, just in terms of like where I want to spend my time, I think it
Mhm.
might be a great short even now, but it's like the short thesis is already out there. It's heavily shorted, and it's already been written up. So that doesn't mean it's not a great short. It just means like, can I get a lot of credit for like doing research on it and then like telling people about it? Probably not. So from my perspective, I'm not necessarily looking for the best short. I'm just looking for stuff that I find interesting that people haven't talked about and where I can like I guess build a brand by like talking about it. Because if I go to someone and pitch Smile Direct Club, they'll be like, "Oh, but I've already heard this." But if I find some really new or novel idea and pitch it, I can get like a lot of credit and people will like me.
Yeah, sure, sure. I get that. I mean, there it's always about the added value, right? You don't want to redo something that everyone else did before you, and then just come up with the same outcome or opinion, even though there might be some new stuff. That's for sure. Yeah. Maybe coming back a bit. We talked about Stanford and their reaction, their beautiful reaction to your Care.com piece, but yeah, we didn't really talk about the studies. I would be really interested to hear what value are you getting from your economics degree at Stanford? Is there anything that helps you to be a better investor or short seller?
I would say probably not. I don't even love economics that much. I'm more of like a stock nerd than an economics nerd. I would say that one of the big benefits of Stanford is it does open up a lot of doors for you. Like I cold email like hundreds of people every year, and the fact that I have an at stanford.edu email address, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant in saying this, but I do think like people are more likely to respond seeing that you're like a Stanford student than if you were just like using some Gmail address. So that's probably been like one of the biggest helps, like is just having that email address that I can use to like cold email people, because I cold email a lot of people and I think the response rate is higher because of it. And I do think like people are just more willing to meet with you if you say you're a Stanford student.
I mean, did any of your professors say anything about your research, or did they hear about it? I mean, certainly, you made some waves. Maybe just now, maybe there will be some reactions afterwards. But did it ever happen? Because I mean, that's pretty relevant. I guess I don't know how Stanford teaches economics, but I guess they mentioned efficient market hypothesis, right?
Yeah, let's see. I think we had a class taught by the endowment managers at Stanford. I was in that class, and I showed this to them, being like, "Look, I just wrote an article with public information, and the stock fell 6%. How can it be efficient if I'm like talking about public stuff and it's moving the stock price?" Um, but yeah, so I do think some of the econ professors, like I told them about this, some offered to help if it like really got to a bad situation with me in Stanford. But like in terms of how like does the economics at Stanford influence my thinking, not really. The in some of my classes we've had guest speakers come in like who run hedge funds and stuff, so I guess it's nice to see how they think. But no, there's not really been
Sure.
any teaching in economics that's like influenced short selling. I think short selling it's just like digging, common sense, and like that's that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a good definition. Very much the core of it all. What are you reading? Just are you strictly really only digging into companies, or do you read some books or some literature, about short selling, about accounting, or whatever it is, corporate governance, stories from other investors?
In terms of books, right now on my desk, I have The Man Who Solved the Market by Greg Zuckerman. He's the same reporter who did Care.com for the Wall Street Journal. I read a lot of nonfiction. I like biographies. I read Bob Iger's, the CEO, the ex-CEO of Disney's um, autobiography, and I thought that was great. I just want to make sure I get the title right. The Ride of a Lifetime. That was a great book. But what do I read? I read a ton of like newspaper articles. Like I think every day I read like at least half of the articles on the Wall Street Journal website. I just love reading journalism. Like a lot of New York Times articles, anything Gretchen Morgensen writes, I read. So I read a lot of like just journalism, and usually I use Twitter as like Twitter and the Wall Street Journal homepage to find stuff to read. But I read a like very very large amount.
Fair enough. Have you ever thought about a Financial Times subscription?
I think people just send me articles. I don't think I have a Financial Times subscription. Maybe I should. I know they've done a lot of good work on Wirecard. But no, I think honestly 80% of the words I read every day are in the Wall Street Journal.
Sure, sure. No, no, I get it. I mean, kind of like your WSJ is my Financial Times. That's why I asked because I kind of do the same with FT.
Is the Financial Times more international focused?
Yeah, I'd say so for sure. And actually, like regarding stock research or whatever, they're not they're good in some points, Wirecard for example, but basically probably they're not as focused on single stocks. They run broader, I guess, news. And yeah, less. I mean, more international. I would say, yeah, for sure. I'd say for sure.
One thing, Jan, if it's okay to do a little self-promotional plug that everybody should be
Go for it.
reading is The Bear Cave. I have a weekly email newsletter called The Bear Cave that does a great job summing up what's been happening in the short world and provides like cool articles to read. And I think it's a great like first source to come up with short ideas. And people can sign up at thebearcave.substack.com, and maybe we can include a link somewhere. But
For sure, I will more than gladly include a link. It's interesting that you actually include SEC news there. Is there like is that just from your reading of newspapers that you come up with the SEC news, or do you read something specifically? Like some website that I never heard of about the SEC.
I mean, the SEC publicly announces their press releases. So, like, you can read the SEC's, like, there's a section of their website with their press releases and complaints and their administrative actions. So, like, I check out all those on a weekly basis to see if there's anything cool. Like, I also look to John Gavin's credit. I think the one thing he was able to do that was really big was now the SEC posts their correspondence with companies online, so you can search for that fairly easy on the SEC's database. So I always look to see like what new letters is the SEC sending to companies. So like I love Edgar, and I spend a lot of time there. And there's a lot of tools like I don't think people fully get that is on Edgar. I think Bloomberg might replicate some of it, but like there's a full text search feature of Edgar, so you can see like every company that's used the word Bitcoin in their 10K. You can search for that via the SEC's website, or you can search someone's name and find like every time someone's name has appeared in an SEC filing for like any company. So if you find like a board member who you think shady, you can go to the SEC's full text search feature, put in that board member's name, and it'll show you like every filing, just every filing where his name's appeared, not just where he's like an officer or board member, but where he's an investor, where just anytime his name is mentioned, it'll show you that for like I think the last 3 years. And I think that's an underused tool.
Yeah, I mean it's getting really powerful. Do you have any other software tools like that helped you during research? Because I personally, for example, use also AlphaSense. I don't know, it's kind of like what you just described, but a bit more friendlier in terms of the usage, and actually it goes globally, so not only SEC, but can actually scour the whole market, public market. That is.
I don't really use. I'm trying to think if I like. I mean, the thing I use the most is Twitter. I think Twitter is outstanding. Like, but I'm trying to think. No, I'm really just like FOIA's, Twitter, Wall Street Journal, SEC filings, talking to people. That's like my research.
Sure, sure. I mean, yeah, anyways, when it's simple, it's better. So you mentioned you're gonna graduate soon. What are you going to do next?
That's a great question. Um, So I'll almost certainly be going to New York City, and I'm going to try to start my own thing for a few months and see if I can make it work. And what I'm thinking of right now, and this might sound a little gimmicky, is starting like an email newsletter. The Bear Cave is going to be it. And the goal will be to like grow it to a lot of free subscribers. And eventually I'm going to start putting like more content up there. Like just like short reports or like investigative reports. Um, Growing that, and then eventually charging like a subsection of people like $30 a month for content. And you might be like, that sounds odd. I don't know if that'll work. But there's a guy called Petition that literally just like writes about like bankruptcy, and like a bunch of bankruptcy lawyers follow his blog, his email newsletter, like the investors, distressed investors follow it. And over the course of 2 years, now he's earning over $500,000 a year running an email newsletter, and he's raising prices. So there's definitely like a market for this type of stuff, and I don't see why there shouldn't be one for the short world, and I want to do that. And if you can get like 1,000 people to sign up and pay you $30 a month to like just write about what's happening in the short world and maybe like help them come up with ideas, I think like, you can do very well doing that, especially as a young person. And at minimum, you'll meet a lot of people and it will be like social. Um, but that's what I'm thinking of. So this makes it extra important you sign up at the bearcave.substack.com and get on that email list, because there will be like new stuff going on there. So that's kind of the plan. Graduate a little early, go home for a bit, go to New York City, grow this email list to 10,000 people, then introduce paid subscriptions where people can pay $30 a month for extra content. And if you get enough people to sign up, the economics can work. And there's a past precedent of it working with some other people that are like earning a lot of money doing this.
For sure, it makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't think of it as weird. First of all, I did that for the ODC world, so I'm kind of a bit biased regarding whether it works or not, but or whether it's weird or not. But I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it's kind of interesting. Like, there's a lot of these like financial websites that just pull in a ton of money and don't put in like a lot of great content. Like, I read this interview with the guy who runs MarketBeat, and which is just like this financial website where you can like search for like info on companies. And he says like they're earning like $6 million a year primarily in advertising, and they like have a daily email that goes out to like a few million people where they like just put ads in the email and they earn a ton of money from it. And I'm like, none of this seems this complicated, and like if you can actually produce good content, like you should be able to do well. And I think email might be having a resurgence soon, because the internet world is getting clustered. There's ads everywhere. It's kind of disgusting to look at. But email, is clean. You can read at your own convenience. It can't be censored. So I really think there could be like a new renaissance for email in the future.
Sure, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I think so. I think that's certainly an interesting plan. So you didn't really want to work for someone. You want to kind of try being independent for a while.
Exactly. And there's two hedge funds that have said I could like have some desk space if I just wanted to pursue this idea. So I like would have an office to go to. And my perspective is like there's no better time to fail than like right out of college. Because if you go and you try to do something and make like a financial media website, you like and fail, it's easy to go get a job and just tell people, I tried this, it failed, this is my track record. Versus like if you get a job and then quit 6 months later to try to do something, then it's like kind of weird. And then like, and then like, will it be easier to get a job later? And maybe you just delay quitting to pursue your idea later and later and later. So if you want to pursue something, the time to do it is like right after graduating college. And I don't think anyone would be upset at me if I fail doing it. So that's what I'm planning to do.
Yeah, for sure, makes perfect sense. I would say that I have similar approach, and then people should remember, even the basic portfolio theory says go into stocks when you're young and buy bonds later. Who knows whether is going to be valid or not. I don't know how the market's going to look like, but basically that's the analogy, right? I mean, you want to be more risky in the front in the early years, and then be more conservative when it comes to later.
Yeah, 100%.
Fair enough. Are there any recent short campaigns that you're closely following, or stocks that you're really interested in?
Great question. Let me think about that. Like now with school and a lot of classes, I spend a little less time on it. But, I think Yext is this really interesting company, if I can talk about them a bit.
For
two
sure.
$2 billion market cap, more or less. Software company in New York City. They trade at like 6 times revenue or so, which is really low. And they, in theory, help small businesses manage their online web presence, or at least that's what they used to do. And they used to do it through like a somewhat scammy practice, in my opinion, of of um of like telling businesses, hey, if you want your address and hours of operation and the basic facts of your business synchronized across all these platforms like Google, Yahoo, Bing, Siri, Alexa, pay us $30 a month and we'll do it. But what they were actually doing is they were partnering with websites like Yelp and saying, like, don't let anyone correct your info unless they go through us. So like now small businesses that have incorrect info on the web need to pay Yext to fix it. So it starts off as like this kind of scammy business, and I don't think people really appreciate it. And now they've been trying to transition into like more of an enterprise customer base selling products, like running like the internal search bar on a website. So if you search Campbell's Soup website for like chicken soup, that search is like executed by Yext, and the results displayed are like determined by Yext. So there's it's like they've never been profitable. Their losses have been growing. I think the core of their business, their listing service, is really scammy. And if you look, there's a lot of consumer complaints about them. The CEO is kind of odd, and if you just like watch an interview with him, you'll know what I mean. And they're not heavily shorted. This is not a well-trafficked short thesis, and it's like they pivoted well before. So it's like I don't think there's no value there, and I think it's like interesting the new products they've been releasing. I just think, like, this is a company that's going to be running out of cash in 2 or 3 years, and just like has a core product, their listings product, which is in steep decline. No one really likes it. I've talked to like people in the industry, and all of them are like short EX. The the products aren't great. And it's just like this thing that's not being paid attention to by Wall Street. So I have an article like I wrote on Medium about it. Um, and I just think there's this like underfollowed and misunderstood company where everybody's like, oh, they're trading at 6 times revenue. It's so cheap on a multiples basis, and they're doing this transition. And I'm like, no, like actually, like they have this like core service that's become outdated. I think customers really don't like their core product, and I don't think the transition's going as well as people think. And they've always lost money, and their losses are growing. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do that well in the future.
Sure, and I mean, I read your report. It was really interesting, especially the point about Confide, the company that the CEO somehow spun off, but that was not really clear. Um, did you actually research them after the report, or are you digging into some aspect of the thesis right now, or you will do in the future?
So the big thing is what percent of their revenue comes from this listing stuff. So what the Yext will tell people is that their direct revenue from small businesses is less than 10%. Because small businesses tend to be like lower quality from a revenue perspective. They churn higher. Um,
I mean, a lot of the complaints were from small businesses, right?
yeah, but my theory is that the amount of revenue they actually get from small businesses is really high, but they just go through resellers to sell through small businesses. So and like you can go on their website. Yext has a website for resellers who sell to small businesses. That's just a fact. But like the big question is what percent of their revenue comes from that? Because Yext says like all their enterprise customers are grouped with their resellers for their revenue segment, and that segment's like 90% of their revenue. But they don't disclose what percent of their revenue actually comes from resellers selling their product. And my theory is, these resellers are probably a much bigger percentage of revenue than the Yext on, and they're probably like really, really shady. Like one of the articles I quote in my report is that like people were getting calls from like scammy call centers, like just trying to scam people into buying Yext products. And clearly, like, this is not how like a reputable tech company should be selling their software, but it's how Yext software is sold. So I think the reseller segment is like, if someone wanted to do more research on that, look into Yext resellers, determine one if they're big and two if they're like shady. And if they are, I think you could see like real decline from resellers in the future, and then a decline in the stock price.
Fair enough, fair enough. And did you actually ever looked into the Confide app, or was it just something that you kind of researched, you thought was weird, but that's where you left it, or?
So let's just explain a little bit about what Confide is.
Yeah.
Confide is this app. It's kind of like Snapchat for business or like Signal. Um, and it was made, I don't know, 8 years ago. And it started as an internal project at Yext. And I know this because in an interview, the CEO said it started as an internal project at Yext, where like a few Yext engineers and the CEO started it. And then if you like look at Confide now, it's a completely separate company. There's no mention it was started at Yext. And in the interview, like a very old interview, the CEO is like, "Yeah, we started this app and then we like spun it out into a separate company and but we let Yext keep a 20% equity stake to keep it fair." And I'm like, "One, that's just not how it works. Like Amazon doesn't start AWS and then Jeff Bezos sees, oh, it's becoming successful. Let me like spin it off and like give Amazon 20% and let me or like some other investors get 80%. No. And then two, I can't find like any evidence that Yext has this 20% stake in this app. And I, to be honest, I don't think this app is that valuable. Like from a materiality perspective, I'm not sure if like it impacts the stock price, but it does go to this point about governance. Like, is the governance good there, or is it just like the CEO can do whatever he wants, and if he like builds a good internal project, he can just like take the app for his own. Um, so it was just like this really odd thing. And it's like, a lot just didn't add up with the situation. The CEO just says, oh, we spun it off and only gave Yext 20%. Then, like, no public records other than this interview indicate that the app was started at Yext. Their Yext SEC filings never mention like an equity stake in Confide. You just get the sense it's a completely separate company. It's just like this interview just seemed inconsistent with like the publicly stated facts. So I wrote about it.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting because I mean I think you mentioned that Confined is now valued at, I don't know, some billions or something, or millions. I don't know, hundreds of millions, right? It's a pretty high valuation, right, for the app.
Yeah. Well, no. Sorry, I don't think Confide is valued that high. I think they got some venture capital funding. I just don't know how valuable the app is now. I if I had to guess, I would probably say not that high, but I don't know that it's necessarily a really valuable thing.
Sure, sure. But in any case, yeah, I mean, it raises some questions, especially about, yeah, as you mentioned, governance and how the company actually deals with their internal stuff.
Very true.
So did someone of your friends got scammed by Yext?
No, I heard someone told me about it at like an ideas dinner, and then I started looking into it. And one of the first things I try to determine is like, are customers happy or not? Because I think it's very tough to like say short a company where the customers are like genuinely pleased. But if customers are like really upset or like are getting scammed, for me that's a good starting point. And just because you're like scamming customers doesn't mean it's a good short. Like, a lot of people say Herbalife wasn't really helping its like customers, but that doesn't make it a good short. But I think it's a good starting point is companies that are like really pissing off people.
Yeah, sure, sure. I mean, even some payday lenders were not a good short back in the days. I mean, they were at one point, but at some other points they were certainly not. So that certainly goes a long way. I mean, I think that's really great insight in the customer complaints, because to be honest, I don't really see that as a huge factor in some of the research that goes out. And me personally, I would think of like, oh, are you really gonna quote BBB? Are you really gonna quote Glassdoor? Come on. But that's, I mean, that's what some people do. But then when you take it, to the complaints level, perhaps AG, that's a really cool point. I really like that.
And that's what I love, because like, no, like if you see a report that just has like a screenshot of an internet complaint, people will like roll their eyes a little and be like, who knows if this is real? A short seller could have written this. But if you have like a screenshot of an actual like letter someone wrote to an AG, it gives it a whole different flavor. Like, I read a letter from a flower shop owner writing the New York State Attorney General about how Yext is hurting her business and how they feel it's like an extortion racket, and that's like, okay, this is really interesting. And then like, what's really cool is then the AGs will sometimes write a letter to Yext being like, can you explain this? And then you'll get Yext response. And then like sometimes the responses will be bad, or like they're lying or something, and then you're like, okay, this is something to look into. And that's just like it doesn't, it just takes a little bit of time and waiting and maybe like $20 in fees, but you get like so much more information. um I think it's worth it.
That's really cool. What was the most extreme complaint that you've ever saw, or most ridiculous one? Do you
Oh
remember
God.
one?
Oh goodness. um let's see. There's two that are jumping out right now. I'm trying to think if there's. So for care.com, and this is included in my report, there's a woman who writes the Massachusetts State Attorney General being like, you know, I call this company and they're just refusing to stop billing my credit card. I emailed this company and they refuse to stop billing this credit card. I contacted this company in like a dozen different ways and they refuse to stop billing my credit card. So I canceled my credit card, and then somehow care.com started billing my husband's credit card. And I cannot get them to stop billing me for this service that I don't use. They've been billing me for the last 5 years, and now I'm writing you, Miss State Attorney General, with the care.com CC, asking them to like stop like charging my credit card. And it's like, I get why companies want to make it a little difficult to cancel, but if you're at the point of people like spending tons of time and writing your state attorney general just to get them to stop billing you, I mean, that's pretty bad. And I don't really remember if the company's response was even public, but um yeah, that was a pretty
Sure.
bad complaint. So like a lot of these complaints will just be like poorly written, or just like, so sometimes it's sad. Like I saw one complaint, I think, against Boeing that was just like a 14-page handwritten letter by someone just like ranting against the company. And it's like, that's probably not going to be that helpful. But sometimes you'll get like a tight 3-page letter that explains a lot of information. Um,
Sure, sure. I mean, especially with the response from the company, that can tell you a lot. Most certainly, yeah. That's really good source. Was there a point in time when you researched something and it turned out as completely useless, and you spent a lot of time on it? Let's say, was there something like that where you went in depth and you tried to find something interesting, and maybe you missed something, or maybe you kept going even though you didn't really get what you were looking for? Was there any sort of like that experience, and maybe what you've learned from it, or what is your kind of gut instinct when it comes to research, and how do you sort the good ones from the bad ones?
so I would say, like, in terms of like past research mistakes, I spent a lot of time researching ubiquity networks, and I was
Mhm.
convinced, like, this company was inflating revenue or doing something wrong. But the stock is like absolutely killed short sellers, um and is up a ton, and it doesn't look like anything wrong was happening. I think sometimes the mistakes people get into, me included, is you focus too much on like circumstantial evidence without
Mhm.
like getting to the direct root problem. So like for any big company, there's going to be a lot of issues. Um, but like you might just like get caught up on this like on like all these like little issues rather than like the main point of like, they're actually selling a lot of the product and revenues are growing, whatever. So for ubiquity networks, one of the things I looked at a lot was they had this community board where supposedly like users could post about like the products and help each other like solve any tech issues. And like every quarter they would announce how many users they had on this community board. And if you actually like looked on the community board, like in the URLs for every user was like the number in which they like signed up. So like if they said they would have 700,000 at the end of the quarter, you could look, and the most recently signed up like person in their URL would have like the number 700,000. So I started like poking around this, and I saw like they actually were skipping every odd number for like a period of 2 years to help inflate the metric. And then it was clear like some of these accounts were just being created but like never used, because like you'd go through like 1,000 and like there would be actually like no public activity. So it was clear like they were inflating this metric. And like I think it's good evidence the company's doing like something that's a little odd, but it's like in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really impact the value of the company. Like, yeah, it points to maybe bad governance, but it probably doesn't impact the value of the company a ton. And I think I think some people get caught up way too much on like circumstantial stuff like that, rather than like focusing on the root of an issue. Sometimes I think you'll get caught up on a bunch of small things, but then miss the bigger picture, I guess. So that's what I think is a common mistake, and I make it too. And then in terms of research process, like usually I'll just start digging around, and almost always, I would say 9 times out of 10, I eventually lose interest. Either like you see company responses that are good, you think like even if they are scamming people, there's nothing that's going to change this. Um, but sometimes you just keep looking, and the more you look, the more you find, and there's just red flag after red flag after red flag after red flag. And like when you see that, then I think you've got the thing you want to dig into.
Sure. I get that. I mean, actually, a question popped into my mind now. Since you met Mark Cahotis, when you were 2, 3 years ago, or whatever, what did you guys actually talk about? Because probably I could imagine that he might give you some tips or some sort of overview of what he has done and what he would focus more on. Or I'm not sure, but what was actually the topic of the discussion?
Wow, I think I talked a little bit about Malincrot to him because that's what I was interested in at the time, and he was being nice and asking questions. Wow, what did he tell me? He was telling me a lot about like the people in the short world on the like short side, and just like giving me names that I wrote down, people I reached out to. I can't remember if
Cool.
he said any specific stocks. I remember I think he was short. He was really obsessed with Home Capital Group at the time. I think he mentioned Wayfair. He mentioned how like short selling is a dying breed, and you have to be crazy to go into it. I don't know if there's anything else though that I'm trying to
Sure.
remember. I remember he seemed like a
Sure.
really entertaining guy. I think he was wearing his pink Crocs at the time.
Everybody from the Twitter sphere knows that, knows the pink ones. Shame that there are no more periscopes anymore, but yeah, these were fun as well. And what about you yourself? Maybe what would be your advice to yourself when you started doing research? Stock research doesn't have to be a specific name or whatever, but just generally, what would you do more of
That's a
for
great
yourself?
question, Jan. Being a little reflective, I think one piece of advice that I think served me really well is that like the smallest amount of initiative can make a really big difference. Like it does not take a lot of time to write a cold email to someone or just like LinkedIn message someone asking them to talk, but it can really make a huge difference because um, I think like maybe it's different as a college student, but just cold emailing 20 people in an industry who are experts saying like, "Hey, I'm trying to learn about this. Are you willing to talk to me?" And then having maybe five get back to you and like being willing to get on the phone. I think that can be really helpful for learning about a company. And I haven't done that always, and maybe I should. And that's something I kind of wish I did more of, is just like talking to experts, especially like people for free. Like I do think with these expert network calls, you might be getting a little bit of a bias because the people on there are probably doing like 50 that are identical, and they know what you want to hear, so they just keep repeating the same thing over and over. But if you reach out to people that like you aren't paying, I think that's a better way of going about it, and that's something I want to do more of.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's a great point and kind of motivational as well. So it's very nice. Are you gonna look at LB again? It was down almost 50% just weeks after your report, which is mainly because of earnings. You kind of alluded to connection with Jeff Epstein and LB. That's the company of Victoria's Secret. But is it on your list so still, or are you tracking it?
Not really. Like L Brands, they own Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works, Bed Bath and Body Works. And my whole angle was like before really everyone was talking about it, I pointed out how like Jeff Epstein had a lot of connections with people there, more than just Les Wexner, but like Ed Razek, the head of like marketing, was in Epstein's black book, I think 10 times. And there was like a bunch of other connections. Um, and because of that, I'm like, this might boil into like a bigger publicity thing and cause turmoil. And it did a little. And Ed Razek is no longer there. He resigned like a few weeks later. And, Les Wexner's basically gone too. I think it's basically played out. Like Victoria's Secret has now mostly been sold. It's going to be like just Bed Bath and Body Works. I have no really opinion on the company anymore. I do think like there's got to be a lot more going on behind the scenes with like Les Wexner though. That does seem interesting. And I think the Wall Street Journal just reported this morning about how like Barclays' CEO was like going to Epstein's Island a few times, and I know like some regulator was like criticizing Barclays CEO for this. And I'm just kind of interested to see what happens with this Epstein stuff because I do think more public companies could be affected that we don't know about.
Do you have any favorite short of someone else, or do some report that you recently read that said like, wow, that's really really good stuff? I haven't seen this for a while.
Let's see. I think Hindenburg has been doing a lot of great work. I haven't been following like all the activist short sellers for a while, like as closely as I should have, but I think Hindenburg has two great reports on Opera and Smile Direct Club, and I think they were both really well done and good reads. And sometimes you'll read something and just after you read it, you'll want to be like, I want to be short this. And I think that's what he did there. And everything Aurelius Value writes, I love. I do think they do a really good job. And I like it the most because like I feel like it's intellectually honest. Like I actually think you can write a short report that's one-sided, but I don't think that's what Aurelius does. I do think he like cares about the facts and doesn't try to mislead people or inflate anything beyond what it is. And because of like the intellectual, and he also talks about like off the beaten path stuff. Like a lot of the stuff I read on Aurelius, I haven't heard of. So
yeah, I read a great piece on Vivint Solar, which I really like as a company to research and potentially short, where he went through the complaints again, the customer complaints, and basically pointed out that Vivint signed a dead person onto their contract, and basically just signed it off as a regular contract, which was really interesting. So
did you read his like open letter to MiMedx's auditor?
No, I have not. No.
That I think is honestly like of any activist short report I read, maybe the Citron Valiant stuff, but the Aurelius open letter to MiMedx's auditor, I think is probably one of the best and most impactful pieces of like writing out there in the short world. Because he literally wrote this like open letter to like MiMedx's head audit person on a Thursday, and then on like the next Monday they announced they were like restating earnings. Like that's how impactful like this letter was, or maybe not restating earnings, but like their auditor announced something that was clearly in response to the letter. And just Aurelius MiMedx open letter, that was like I thought it was just outstanding because it was like clear and easy to follow. Like up to that point, everything in my opinion about MiMedx had been just like pointing out red flags, but it didn't like connect to a coherent story, and you couldn't understand the materiality of it. But then he like puts this letter where it just makes sense reading the letter and you can understand what's going on, and it was so impactful. The auditor responded the next week.
That's really cool. Okay, I'll read that. I haven't followed my medics as closely. Obviously, I know the story and I know the pieces and so on and so forth. But this I will for sure read. I will link it as well in the podcast. Any other fraud stories that you're really big fan of?
Hmm. I know I'll think of something as soon as like we move on to the next topic, but any fraud stories? I liked Roddy Boyd's pieces on Brookfield. I thought those were really interesting. And now Brookfield Asset Management is this massive company, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's like some skeletons buried there. Um, I think Roddy Boyd does a lot of good work. I haven't mentioned him yet, but he's awesome. Um,
Sure.
um, so it's not proven to be a fraud. They're a huge company. I think a lot of people like them, but Brookfield, that just seems interesting, and I think Roddy Boyd did some good pieces on them. Um, other fraud stories that I follow everything Mark Cahotis puts out on my medics, and people call him crazy or over the top. I just think he does outstanding work. So anything Mark Cahotis touches is like a 10 in terms of interest level for me. I followed his my medics campaigns a fair amount, and that's been really impressive. Um,
Sure. No, I mean like it was just kind of see whether you come up with something. Yeah. So
how
it
about
was
you, Jan? Has there been any like big shorts that like have been a big part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, really, the story behind The Big Short was something that really interested me. Basically, because of how the authorities were involved as well, or how the SEC was complacent. That was, I think, big part of my kind of like interest into short selling. The story behind that, I think that would be the biggest for me, I would say.
Allied
As
Capital.
well.
Now that you mentioned The Big Short, Allied Capital and David Einhorn's book, Fooling Some of the People All the
Got it.
Time. That is something like, have you read it?
Yes, yes, I've read it. Yes.
I think that was like, wow, talk about outstanding. He just understood what was wrong with this company. I've talked to someone at Greenlight and they're like, yeah, we didn't even make that much money on the short, which like goes to show like, short selling
Sure.
is not easy. But because the borrow costs were high and there was a huge dividend yield, but it's like he knew exactly what was happening. He knew how it was wrong, but he wasn't able like to like, even though he was talking to the SEC and blowing the whistle in every way possible, wasn't able to really get anyone to pay attention until like it was too late, I guess. And he also talked about, I remember in the book, how he would like write articles like on Monthly Fool or just like publicly post articles about Allied Capital. And he'd write a really good one and the stock wouldn't move. And then he'd write like just like a half decent one and the stock would react like in a big way, which to me shows like stock movement in response to reports is really arbitrary. Like I'll read something that I think is outstanding and it won't move the stock, and I'll read something that I think is just mediocre and it will move the stock. And I just think it goes to show you can't like trust short-term stock movements to like value the quality of a piece, but fooling some of the people all the time. And that reminds me of another company called Main Street Capital that's been on my
Mhm.
radar for like a long time, off and on for like the last 5 years. They're a big publicly traded BDC out of Texas. And they're kind of
Mhm.
seen as the gold standard for BDCs, business development companies. Most business development companies trade at like a discount to net asset value because people will assume, they might be inflating net asset value. Usually these businesses like have a lot of overhead fees, whatever. Main Street Capital actually trades at a premium, and I'm pretty sure a pretty big premium to
Mhm.
um, net asset value. It's been like one of the best performing BDCs out there. And then the way they've grown net asset value is primarily by issuing shares at a premium to net asset value. So since they IPO'd like 11 years ago, I think shares outstanding are up 7x. And this just isn't a sustainable way of growing net asset value by keeping issuing new shares. Um, And the reason they like popped on my radar is I think like they could be just systematically overvaluing their investments, and that's how they're the best performing BDC out. It's tough to tell like how fairly they're valuing their investments because they mostly invest in private companies. But the one public company Main Street Capital has invested in is a company called Glowpoint, which I'm pretty sure is like bankrupt now. Let's see. Oh, the ticker's Glow. They have a $10 million market cap, whatever, and they're down like 90% over the last 5 years, and they make like video conferencing software. And I remember like Main Street Capital loaned this company called Glowpoint like $10 million. And then if you read Glowpoint's 10K like 2 years later, they're like, we expect to default on this loan from Main Street Capital. Like they explicitly said they expect to default on the loan. And then I look like how much has Main Street Capital marked this loan down by? Guess, Jan, how much Main Street Capital marked their loan down by once Glowpoint, this like virtually bankrupt tech software company, said that they were going to default?
I would say that they would mark them up, but that's too insane. So let's say that they didn't change it.
That they marked it down 2%. How in the world are you marking it down 2% when this company is explicitly saying they're going to default? And then they like did default. And I'm not 100% sure about the facts, but I'm pretty sure Main Street like ended up marking it down 50%, and it was like a big loss. But it was like that to me was just a huge red flag. You're clearly mismarking something, and you're the best performing out there. You're seen as the gold standard. And like I've tried really hard to like try to like value its other assets. And if I was like a big hedge fund looking for a new project, Main Street Capital would be at the high end of my list because they're just seen as this like golden boy of the BDC industry, and I'm not sure that it's deserved.
That's really cool. I mean, I really appreciate that because have you read Copperfield Research wrote about new tech business services? Have you got to know that, or is that on your radar? That's really what I really recommend reading, because that's very similar story. But the thing is that Newt is also BDC, but they do SBA loans, yeah, and so guaranteed loans. And the fun thing is that this is also valued at premium to NAV, yeah. And the loans there, however, are visible, right? Because you can kind of see what who they loan and so on and so forth, because it's a BDC and so on and so forth. So you can do a good deal research on the individual loans. And Copperfield Research did a great report about the valuation of these loans, and they found insane things. Things like bowling alleys being marked up at a premium to par value, right? The company itself has a delinquency rate of about more than 10%, right? And it's insane stories of like wildly, really dubious lending practices and marking of those loans, because that were very similar to your Main Street example. Newt, which is the ticker NUWT, they did a loan to some company. I don't even know what was the purpose of the company, and 6 months later the company went bankrupt. And they didn't even mark the loan down when they went bankrupt. They marked it afterwards. We marked it down afterwards. It was marked at a premium before. It's just insane. Like that's something that I stumble upon. It's $400 million market cap, so not the biggest, but it's both optionable and shortable. And I'm really interested in that because that research was interesting. And it's a dividend yielder, as your Main Street thing is. Therefore, there are a lot of people they're trying to own this for the dividend, but they're cash flow negative. They've been raising money from the shareholders through ATMs. So yeah, I mean, it's that was really interesting. So great points. I think that's really interesting.
Thanks for mentioning Newt. I'm on their Copperfield Research Twitter page now, and I'm marking all the tweets, so I'm going to include it in this week's issue of the Bear Cave.
Yeah, but do that because that's really, I felt that was really interesting. I'm not sure if much is missing from the research report. I mean, there's not like a individual analysis of every loan, but they really point out a lot of the loans, and I mean, a lot of it is just completely crazy. How they market and how they treat the accounting and how they basically try to use non-GAAP to avoid, showcasing losses on the loans. It's insane. I really recommend it.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I think dividend yielders nowadays is going to be very interesting territory to look into, or it has been, I guess, in the past. That's really cool. By the way, just one question before we kind of move towards the ending of the podcast. Are you looking into other geographies than US? Have you looked at China before, or are you trying to stick to what you kind of know and where you are?
Yeah, Jan, I would say like the US is big enough for me. I'm young and I'm still learning, and I think for me, I just want to stick in my circle of competence in the US. It's like I just feel like it's just going to be completely different if you're looking at a company in another country. There might be a language barrier. You're definitely not going to know the public record system if it exists. I feel like the way it's just going to be like a lot more difficult. So for me, I really focus on U.S. companies, ideally with like a market cap of 500 million or more. And it's not like that I'm not interested in stuff outside the U.S. It's just like I don't even know like how I would go about like researching it to start.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And so maybe kind of going over all that we've discussed, where do you think your edge lies?
Edge lies. Um, hmm. I've always disliked the term like where does your edge come from? Because I think it's like possible that you're just like, a person with good common sense. You're able like to just like understand like what's material and what's not and put on trades and have it work. I don't like the like I don't love the term like edge per se. I think I'm really good at public record stuff. I think, in terms of understanding state AGs and how they respond to public records, I might be among the most knowledgeable, I think, out there. I think a weakness is definitely like when it comes to modeling. I just don't, I'm just not good at modeling or like predicting the next quarter. Um, I think I just have a generally good gut sense for what's going to be material or what's not, and like whether this is a real big problem or just like the type of scamminess you see like every day at companies. Um, but in terms of edge, I don't know if I could just like categorize it into a singular thing.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But the things that you already pointed out are pretty obvious. Be it public records or I think the fact that you went and impersonated Harvey Weinstein, that tells you something. Like it's just kind of like I think people could look at Care.com and say, hey, maybe that's a scam, and I'm gonna go away, and that's it. But you kind of did this, and you went for it. So I think that's something maybe that activity is on its own quite interesting, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say I also like obsess over something. Like if you talk to a lot of short sellers, I think the great ones will tell you like they obsess over companies. Like they dream about companies. Like they're thinking about it all the time. And like when I'm really interested in a company, like I am talking about it nonstop. My friends will like get upset because I'll only be talking about the company, and you just like keep talking about it and thinking about it. So I would say maybe the biggest advantage I have is I have the ability to get obsessed with things, and that serves me well.
Sure. In short selling, I think that has to be there, because if not, then I don't think people would continue doing without being obsessed about something. Yeah. Any final thoughts on anything that we discussed?
Um, no, I've really enjoyed being on this podcast. I look forward to your future podcast. I do want to admit, like when I was in high school, I'd read a lot of Seeking Alpha to get interested in this stuff, and I do remember reading some of your pieces. I don't know
Oh, cool.
if there was a specific one, but I do remember you, and there was some other person who was doing a lot of like microcap work too.
That's really cool. I think Seeking Alpha was for me what your contacts were for you, because basically it just makes a lot of you're exposed to a lot of people that read it, and even though some of the quality over there might not be the best, but still I think it's a great tool for exposure and for comments anyway. So, and I think that 99% of people read it. Like, probably they wouldn't want to talk about reading it, but they read it for sure.
Yeah. Everyone wants to hate on it. No one wants to stop using it.
Exactly right. I think that is a good point. Yeah. So that's really cool. That's really cool. That's good to hear. Well, in that case, I would really like to again thank you for a brilliant interview. I really enjoyed it. Great insight into care.com and your research. And well, I wish you many more care.com finds soon, and no trouble with governments or Stanford or any other authority that might stop you in your tracks.
Thank you, Jan. I appreciate it, and thanks for doing this podcast. I think it's great for the short world.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. That is it for our interview with Edwin. If you're interested in something we talked about, do not hesitate to check out the description of the episode. There's Edwin's Twitter and the link for Bear Cave. Lastly, do not forget to subscribe to the podcast. There will be new interviews coming soon. Thanks a lot for listening.